people are running late. We might be jumping around in our agenda today, because I think Maytag's going to be a little bit late, and some of those items we'll need for her, so we'll do the best we can. Good morning, Howard. Nope, you're good. They're gonna have to explain a little bit.
So is Maytag, so we may have to jump around a little bit.
You got a signature on that one.
Recording in progress.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Do what we can do, jump around a little bit until Maytag shows up. Let me start with the roll call. Eswar, I believe, is running late, so he should be here soon. Sunita?
Present.
Andrew?
Here.
David Kwan?
Here.
Howard Lee?
Present.
Dick?
Yes.
David Woosley?
Here.
Gretchen?
Here.
And myself, Franco, I am here. So I believe we're going to wait for Maytag on the closed session. No orders of the day. We do have a quorum, so I will entertain a motion for the consent calendar. I got a motion from Dick.
Second Gardenier.
I got second Gardenier. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, let's see what else we can get going here. Okay.
If you want to go right to mine, I can do my oral update.
Yep. So we're going to jump to item 4A for the update of the CEO.
All right, good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to welcome Councilmember Casey, joining as our council liaison for the Police and Fire Board. Councilmember Casey and I had an introductory call earlier this week, and look forward to working with you and your team. ORS is continuing the recruitment for senior office specialist position, and we expect it to be filled by the end of the month. The recruitment for our accounting position is underway. The good news is that we had a great response, which means that it'll take a little bit longer for us to get through, and we're hoping to have that position filled by April. Just as a note, the city has a hiring freeze that went into effect December 16th. This has not impacted the recruitments I just mentioned, but could impact future recruitment activities if they were needed. As I've mentioned previously, our office lease expires March 31st. ORS has completed a space analysis and has started negotiations with our landlord, but we have not yet agreed to all of our terms. We do have an agenda item later on today's agenda later today. RFP updates. We've had a lot of progress on our RFP side. We have 3 active RFPs, one for legal services, one for actuarial services, and one for governance services. Legal services closed on January 24th, and we had 32 downloads of the RFP. We received 8 proposals that were submitted across the 6 different legal services. And the good news is that we have at least 2 proposals for each of the legal service areas. Staff is working to provide recommendations to the JAHC, the Joint Ad Hoc Committee, for the disability, DRO, tax, and investment service areas. The Joint Ad Hoc Committee and staff are together scoring the general and fiduciary services. We have a few meetings scheduled next week to narrow the candidates and determine if we'll have interviews, if interviews will be required for which service area. Actuarial services, that closed on January 31st. We had 20 RFP downloads, and we've had 5 proposals submitted. Because we're working through the legal, it's the same staff that will be on the scoring committee for the actuarial services, but we'll start scoring those probably late next week, and identify the candidates that we recommend for interview. We'll work with the actuarial RFP Joint Ad Hoc Committee to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss whether the finalized will be brought to the ad hoc committee or if they'll be brought to the full board directly. And then lastly, for governance services, that RFP also closed on the 31st. We had 40 downloads for the RFP. We had 5 proposals submitted. Barbara and I will be scoring those proposals and determine the finalists to bring in for interviews before we make final recommendation to the boards, targeted to be done in March. A few trustees reported some inconsistencies in their 2024 1099s. I sent out an email late yesterday notifying any impacted trustees. Just as a reminder, while the city generates the 1099s for you through their financial management system, it's based on the quarterly payments for stipends and reimbursements that our staff enter into the system. The important thing to note is that while we only received notification from, I think, 2 trustees, we believe that all trustees were impacted, their 1099s were impacted due to this what we believe is a miscategorization of the reimbursements. As soon as I have more information, I'll share it, but right now we're still working through this with finance. The important thing to note for the public and our members is that this did not impact our retiree 1099s. It's only the trustees. You are the lucky ones. Our retiree 1099Rs were mailed out last week of January. And again, we're not impacted by the trustee issue. The guaranteed purchasing power for 2024 will be paid to those who qualify in February for both Federated and Police and Fire. Retirees impacted by the 415 limit. As a reminder, 2025 415 limit was up to $280,000. We'll see those 2025 adjustments in their March retirement payment. The January edition of the Retirement Connection newsletter was distributed in January. As previously mentioned, ORS will be defaulting to a digital distribution for the newsletter in the summer edition. We have an article in the current newsletter that describe the change, the instructions if the person would like to continue to receive a paper copy. The title of that article is called Go Green, Read Us Online. So the retirees should take a look at that to determine if they want to still continue to receive a paper copy. Effective January 5th, 2025, the IRS standard mileage reimbursement rate changed to 70 cents per mile. This is in effect for all miles driven after January 5th. I'm planning to receive a cybersecurity briefing this afternoon. We'll be updated on the cybersecurity project that had addressed some of the recommendations from a prior audit. After that meeting, we'll determine when it's appropriate to bring it to the boards, and of course, that will have to be done in closed session. Maytech and I completed a new trustee onboarding program with Trustee Flicker. We will work with Trustee Woosley to schedule one soon. It was a couple hours well spent, I think it was as educational for me as it was for Trustee Flicker. I worked with Maytech on that, and so I thought it was a very good session. I have started discussions with the chairs and some of the ORS executive team to develop a program for a retreat for our boards. We're targeting the September meetings as of right now. While I don't have an agenda to share with you yet, we're working to develop that, but it's fair to expect that meeting, the September meeting, will be a full day. So, I know sometimes we don't go a full day for our board meetings, but it will be a regular board meeting, so we'll still do all of our retirement business, but then we'll have a presentation program that we plan to take everybody through. So it could be a longer day.
And just real quick to add to it, I had this conversation, those of us that have been on the board a while know that we've had retreats in the past. I think it's having so many new trustees that it'd be beneficial for us to have, especially some of the consultants with some of the very specific items to give a presentation to kind of level our playing field. So thank you, John, for working on that. I know it was kind of last minute.
No, it's good. On the agenda today, we have a few city policy updates. I thought it would be good to just let the board know that our internal process is when a new city policy is flagged to ORS, that we do an internal review spearheaded by Barbara, and any updates that are concerned are flagged to me. If there are no concerns, we send them right to the board's agendas, just as no concern, let's go ahead and pass those policies. If there were a concern, instead of coming to the boards directly, they would first go to the governance committee. So if you see a policy on the agenda, just want to let you know that we believe it's de minimis. The changes in the policy are de minimis and don't really impact, we don't believe it impacts anything related to the board, but yet we want to keep up to date with the city policies. So we have a handful of those on the agenda today. ORS has published its retirement workshop schedule in the new newsletter, and I just want to highlight to any of those members who are listening, February 27th from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Held via Zoom. We offer a retirement workshop, and members can register on our website or by sending us an email, and there are details about that in our current newsletter. And then lastly, our offices are scheduled to be closed on Monday, February 17th for President's Day. I'll take any questions.
Okay, hearing none. Just for the record, Trustee Eswar has joined us during John's oral update. And I do believe if Maytag's ready, we can go into closed session.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Apologies, there was flooding on the freeway, so.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly out there today.
Recording stopped.
can strike that. There's no reportable action on item 1A of closed session, which is the RobNet litigation. On closed session item 1B, there is reportable action, and that reportable action is that the board authorized legal counsel to file an amicus brief as presented in the Lacera versus County of Los Angeles case pending before the Supreme Court, and to authorize legal counsel to sign a common interest privilege agreement to share with other city charter retirement plans for their consideration. The motion was as follows. The first was by Chair Votto, the second was by Trustee Flicker, and the vote was unanimous by the trustees.
Thank you. Okay,
For
probably.
both.
Yeah, you're on.
Sorry, I just took a bite of my breakfast.
Timing's everything.
Good morning again. Welcome, Council Member Casey. Go Bells. We have no agenda items under investments this morning, but I do have performance estimates that I would like to report to the board. This comes from Makita as of 2 days ago, the close of February 4th. Fiscal year to date, the pension's up 4.61%, and the healthcare trust is up 4.97%. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I read that, the largest sovereign fund is the Norwegian fund, and supposedly on the website, they have a live performance update. I don't know how they do it because it's a lot of privates, but
Yeah, well, it's dangerous to have live performance updates.
They actually have a lot of public
what's that?
securities. They have a lot.
public, yeah. Right. But I assume they have a lot of privates too.
As a percentage, I don't think it's as high as ours.
Okay, any other questions for public? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 3, old business. Discussion and action on the election of the vice chair of the board.
Is it okay if I?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Tom.
So, like we have done for the past few meetings, I'm just going to read from our policy on the election of board officers. I'm actually going to start back with nominations because I think that's going to be important. The nomination process, our policy says, at the November regular meeting of the board shall seek nominations for the position of board chair and vice chair. Nominees must be nominated by another voting member of the board and may accept or decline the nomination. As far as the election process goes, it says at the December regular meeting, the board will elect one of the board chair nominees and one of the board vice chair nominees to fill the respective roles by open vote. An affirmative vote of 6 board members is required to select the board chair and the board vice chair. In the event there are more than 2 nominees and none receive 6 votes, then there will be a runoff held between the 2 nominees. Paragraph 3 states, if an election for either position fails to result in a nominee receiving 6 votes, and after a good faith effort to achieve such votes during the regular board meeting, then a board member will be selected by random draw to serve in the vacant position until such time as the required votes are obtained through a follow-up election or elections. A follow-up election shall be scheduled for the next regular board meeting and will be repeated at said meetings or subsequent meeting until a candidate is elected. And while I went all the way back to the nomination process is, I received a few questions since our last board meeting, how or if we were allowed to add new nominees or reset the nominations. So our current policy does not contemplate nominations outside of the November meeting. And it simply states that if the board, I think it's pretty simply stated that the nominations are only available during November, and the thing that gets repeated at each board meeting is the actual election. So if the board is looking to introduce new nominees or reset nominations, it would require that there would be no nominees still part of the process. So to allow us to do that, we would need to have no longer sitting nominations. So I just wanted to state that because I did get that question from more than one trustee since our last board meeting.
So, see if I can summarize this real quick. So basically, there's 3 options. We we continue to vote until one is selected with the 6 or more.
Correct.
Okay. If that does not, then that could go on from meeting to meeting to meeting. Option 2 is if one or both drop out, then we could open up the nominations all over again at the next month's meeting.
It would require to have no nominees, so right now we have 2 nominees.
Yeah.
So in order for us to, the policy would be silent what to do at that point, and then this board would have to deliberate on how it would want that process to work, to accept. Essentially, it would be, the motion or something would be, we would allow nominations outside of the November meeting,
Yeah.
right? Because the policy is very specific. And as far as the technicals on how we would do that, I would let Maytech tell us how the Brown Act governs us, but that's essentially either we continue to vote as the policy states, or if we had no nominees, then we would have to, the board would have to determine how it wants to handle that process because the policy is silent.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, and
Just to clarify,
go ahead.
just to clarify, in the case of one nominee, then we can go, that's the answer. We
No,
can- or
that
it's-
one nominee would still require 6 positive votes.
Yeah, but, okay.
So just in terms of the timing, following up on Trustee Gardner's question, so you could either do it 2 ways. You could direct, if there is no nominee, the board could direct staff to add on to the March calendar or agenda to have a particular process to discuss what process they would put on to allow for the nomination, and then would have a secondary agenda item for the nomination itself. So again, because the policy is silent, the board as a whole needs to agree on what the procedure would be to fill that void, and then from there, apply that agreed upon procedure to the nomination process that would come thereafter. So it's a 2-step process. You could do that at the March meeting, or alternatively, if there was a circumstance today where both nominees were withdrawn, it would qualify under the Brown Act as an emergency circumstance that requires the board to take immediate action. And the procedure under the Brown Act, under subdivision 54954.2B, is that the legislative body must first vote by 2/3 vote on a motion that this requires immediate action, and that the circumstances arose after the posting of the agenda, to then allow the board to add an additional item to the agenda today to take action on what to do to fill in that void. So you can either defer it by a month, or you can take immediate action today, depending on the urgency in the eyes of the board.
Can I ask a question on that? So if there was a 2/3 vote to deal with it today, we could then just deal with it today?
We would agree to the procedure for the nomination, but we would not include the nomination itself.
Any other questions on this process? Well, I will open it up to the 2 nominations as to whether either of them wish, or both of them wish to step down from their nomination. And if not, then we'll just call for the vote. Okay, I believe our first nomination was for David Kwan. So I will entertain a motion. I guess I don't need to, we already
There's
have
no
that, right?
motion, yeah, so
It's just a vote.
right, so under the policy, it requires a supermajority, 6 trustees for the election of any vice chair position.
Okay, I'll do that. Just for ease, we'll do it by a show of hands. All those in favor of David Kwan for vice chair, raise your hand. Those opposed?
Please keep your hand up for the record. Hold on, I'm sorry, I gotta recount. Okay, we're at a deadlock.
Okay. That's why you're still the acting chair, or vice chair. All right,
Well,
moving on.
You still also have to take the election of the other candidate as well, so I think the other candidate, if I understand
Oh, I'm sorry.
correctly.
I
is-
apologize.
Yeah.
By a show of hands, all those in favor for Sunita as vice chair, please raise your hand. And all those opposed?
Again, in deadlock.
Would you want to have a discussion about this rather than?
We can have a discussion.
Because it does contemplate that you could revote in the same session.
Yeah, we can have a discussion. But people have to want to discuss it.
Fair.
That's the bottom line. We are in a deadlock. It's unfortunate for Eswar to be put in a situation of vice chair when I know he was initially nominated for it and didn't want to take it. So we could do this every month for the rest of the year. I don't know that that's really going to help anything. So I would entertain one or both removing their nomination and renominating someone else. I will entertain whatever anyone wants to do, but we've got to have a discussion about it.
Well, to try and move on from this topic, I will remove my nomination for vice chair so that we can maybe renew the whole discussion again and have a refresh.
Okay. Sunita, any comment?
Yeah, I guess, I respect David Kwan tremendously. I think he's got some amazing experience. And I think the 5 public members of the board are all equally professionally qualified in their arenas. And so, and I just wanted to remind people that when I got nominated to vice chair, as you just said, it was, Ishwar who was nominated, and he didn't have the time, and suggested that I step in. And Howard and I have very similar tenure and similar experience on the board in terms of being chair of the audit committee at one point or another. But I do think that the right thing for the board is to take into account, it's not about me. I'm perfectly fine, with somebody else being the vice chair, as long as there is, they have the tenure and the experience to be vice chair, which sort of, I feel like the person who still has the most tenure and the experience on this board is Ishwar. So, I mean, I'm happy to step down if we get some understanding that Ishwar is still interested in continuing to be vice chair. And I would nominate him, but I know I can't do that as yet.
So maybe a suggestion after hearing what you said, you're looking for someone that has tenure and experience on this board, to fill the spot. Another option would be, since David, stepped down, if you're willing to step down, we could do renominations. And if we can't get a renomination of someone that you feel is, of that experience, someone could renominate you. And that way, okay, we can see, okay, who's available, and willing to to be vice chair, and we could vote on it. And this way, you still have a say. You can still jump in, if there was someone that you didn't think had the qualifications.
I'll just say, just given where we are, if it's unanimous, I'm happy to be the vice chair. I know there's some requirement about not being chair of a committee. I do want to, as chair of the IC, finish our asset allocation and the IPS decision before I step down as chair of the IC. And that doesn't have to be the end of the year, it can be as soon as it's done. So I do want to finish that work in progress. But other than that, just given where we are, if it's unanimous, I'm happy to be the vice chair.
Well, I'll leave this to Maytac. I, by no purposeful reason other than we didn't catch it, was chair all last year for, I think, governance, not knowing that I was not supposed to be chair. So if that is something that by vote we can take care of, we can. We have, just for information, there is a provision, I think, that I spoke with John, that if public members do not want to be vice chair, which doesn't sound like that's your issue other than the IC chair, that by a supermajority, a safety member can be. So that's another option. But I personally would support you, Eswar, for chair.
Either
Or
option
vice
is
chair,
fine,
sorry.
you know.
So to the IC question, if Eshwar does take the position, and John, if you can check me, I don't have the policy up specifically up for the IC position, we would have to if it does include the vice chair, I know the chair is not allowed to chair another committee. I'm not sure if that same issue extends to the vice chair. I would have to double check the policy. But assuming if it does, then we would have to revisit our committee assignments to address that issue.
I don't think it applies to the vice chair. I think we did have this conversation.
Oh, I'm looking, yeah, give me a second, I just need to pull up the vice chair charter. I do believe it does restrict the vice chair.
I think if I can just chime in, on the federated side, that restriction does not exist. So
Right.
I'm not sure about police and fire.
There is a restriction on police and
Police.
fire. I just don't know if it extends to the vice chair, but it sounds like from what John's looking at, it does extend to the vice chair. It certainly extends to the chair.
And is that a policy that could be changed by the board?
It would generally have to go through the governance committee to come to the board, or alternatively, you can direct staff to bring a modification of both the IC charter as well as the board charter, as well as the vice C charter, to come and bring it into alignment to make that change. So it'd be a lot of action items.
Sure.
So I can confirm, police and fire, vice chair charter, paragraph 6, the board vice chair shall not chair any committee of the board.
Okay. Is there some reason, Eswar, that you don't think you could complete your work as just being on the committee and not the chair? I mean, it's really just a title.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Prabhu and I work together in terms of, getting some of these things through. Can we defer the vote till next month, and maybe that's enough time to, try to finish these things?
No, it's, as it sits right now, I mean, we would have to, with David stepping down and Sunita hasn't officially yet, we would have to take another vote for Sunita. I'm assuming.
Yes.
I mean, as I said,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You were asking for one more month?
Yeah.
Well, so if we basically would have nominations today,
Yeah.
and that's it. So you're still in your role as interim vice chair, you're still chair of IC.
Yeah.
We have a February meeting, and so you got the whole entire month to still work in that role, and the official vote would be next month,
Okay.
the earliest.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, and even, so the intent is to do an asset allocation February 25th.
Yeah.
And we will then get to the IPS, but you and trustee Kwan are still on the two persons on the ad hoc committee, so.
Yeah. Okay.
so I'm a little confused. Go ahead.
So I guess, so we would take a vote next month, so we can finish the strategic. Do we know where we are on the IPS issue? I mean,
We can't do it I think the priority should be strategic asset allocation.
yes.
We'll get that on the 25th.
Yeah.
And the following, in the first week of March, hopefully at the board meeting, we'll get that resolved. And then we'll have an IC meeting in March to tackle the other one.
We'll tackle that. Okay.
So, I mean, actually, you could actually run this for 2 months, which is basically, to Maytag's point, we don't have a special vote, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
The next month, we have the nominations, and then the third month, we have the
That would
vote,
work.
and then you stay interim in the meanwhile. That's the
Okay.
other alternative path.
That's good.
So it gives some more time.
That'll work?
Yeah.
So then the only
I'm
thing that.
looking at council.
So for any additional, so our policy is very specific. It says only nominations can only be had in November. So assuming we continue the nomination votes the next 2 months, we will still be bound by the November nomination unless the board directs or to add an additional agenda item to discuss a circumstance where there's no sitting nominee. So the only way to do that is if Sunita then withdraws and then allows the board to fill that void. Otherwise, the November nomination continues to hold.
So my understanding from earlier, your comments were, if Sunita dropped out, we had two options. Either one, do an emergency waiving Brown Act and do nominations today, or wait till next month, put it on the agenda for nominations.
No, so it would be to add an agenda item to allow the board to describe the process for nominating someone out of cycle, essentially. So add that onto the agenda for today to agree that would be the procedure, and then add that on to the next meeting for the nomination to occur.
Okay, so emergency action today to figure out the process. Next month, nominations, April, vote.
Right, but the board would not be able to invoke that, given that we have a current standing nomination from November that's
Correct.
lingering.
Correct.
Okay, so, I have a conditional withdrawal of my nomination. I will conditionally withdraw my nomination if the board agrees to a renomination process to be considered is this allowed in the next meeting?
I'm sorry, say that, I couldn't hear the last part of your.
If it's allowed, then I would like to conditionally withdraw my nomination on the condition that the board agrees to have a renomination process. What month are we in? February, in the March meeting?
You can conditionally withdraw your nomination. In terms of having the board agree to a particular action, the board would have to take an action to add it on the agenda to ratify that. And so under the Brown Act, it requires a 72-hour posting of it. And since you have not fully withdrawn your nomination and are still covered by the policy, there's nothing to add to the agenda.
I think what Andrew's trying to get with his intent is if you withdraw,
Mm-hmm.
that this board would agree outside of this November time period,
Mhm.
that we would have nominations for the March meeting.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at as
Okay.
well. So
I
I'm
think
on
that's
board
what
with
Andrew's
that. I
trying
was
to say.
wondering if I can do it on a conditional basis. Sounds like that isn't allowed under the,
Right, it has to be a full withdrawal.
because of the,
And
Right.
I don't think a conditional basis is needed because, let's say Ashwar has a change of heart, by next month, he could re-nominate you.
yeah, I mean, I
And
hope
we
not.
start the process over. So I don't think the conditional part is necessary if
Fair
you,
enough. Okay,
you're
so
okay with
I
that.
will withdraw my nomination as well. And
Okay.
I will ask for a motion to add, to waive the Brown Act, to add an agenda item for next month, to revisit the November nomination process. I mean, Maytag, help me with the language.
Is it for next month, or are we adding an emergency item for today to define the process,
Yes.
which would include a
Yes.
nomination next month?
Much better, thank you, John.
So, and just for the record, we are not waiving the Brown Act, we are invoking an exception to the Brown Act, which, for the record. And so that would require a motion and a two-thirds support to add a particular agenda item to allow the board to consider and take action to allow for the nomination out of cycle for November.
Yeah.
So that's the procedure to add a particular item for today that will allow the board to adopt that procedure. And once that procedure has been adopted at the March meeting, it can invoke it and have the nomination at that point.
So that's my motion.
That's her motion, it's my second, to include nominations at next month's meeting.
Wait, it's a two-part motion. First, we have to invoke the exception. So the exception is that there's an emergency circumstance that requires immediate action, and the need for the action came on to the agency's attention after the agenda was posted. They would have to identify what that is, which we have, but we would have to first allow for the adding of that item, and then we can have the item and take action on the substantive item. So there's a procedural motion and then a substantive motion.
I'll move for that.
Why don't you do the
clear with that?
You do the procedural, I'll do the substantive.
Well, we have your initial motion for that, I believe.
Okay,
So the procedural motion would be pursuant to Government Code 54954.2B. The board has a need for immediate action, and the action came to the attention of the agency after the agenda was posted regarding the nomination of vice chair.
Okay, I'll second.
So I have the first from.
I firsted.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, and then so the substantive motion then is up for discussion that I believe was added based on the conversation, was that the board would take discussion and action to allow for the nomination outside of the November cycle as from the policy.
I motion for that.
I will second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, everybody, for your support.
I got a follow-up question. Is the governance committee revisiting this policy
Yes, but we don't want to look at it
until after the fact?
after we've got everything solidified, and
Okay.
then we will look at it.
It's part of the work plan for 2025.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maytac, anything else in this matter?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Casey, welcome. This is your first update. I'm assuming you kind of know what the liaison position is, but it's, you become the conduit between this board and the city council for information that you believe we need to know or information we need to give to council. So I will eagerly await your first update.
Well, I wasn't prepared to speak. I just wanted to listen and take this in. As you know, we're entering into a budget deficit, and so much of our resources are being spent trying to figure that out. I think to the extent that it impacts you guys, I will update you as I get more and more information. At the moment, we're just initiating that process, so not much to report at the moment. But we'll give you a heads up as we go through the process.
Thank you, and again, welcome.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Okay, I think Chiron's up.
All right, hopefully there we go. Good morning, everyone. Jackie and I are here to present the final actuarial valuation results for the OPEB plan. And every month we've been providing you our schedule for the actuarial season. This is the last meeting that's part of the regular valuation process. And so we are doing the final OPEB valuation. There's also an agenda item for the 5-year city contribution projections, but that will be very short. You have attached the full valuation report. We're not planning to go through that, but we'll certainly take any questions on that. So it's been a couple months since we talked about the OPEB plan, so I just wanted to spend a minute talking about some of the differences. The first is where the assets are kept. The assets for the OPEB plan are primarily in a 115 trust that is actually split into 2 sub-trusts, one for police and one for fire. But there's also a small amount of assets in what's called a 401H account that's in the pension trust. And so all of those assets together represent the assets for the plan. The other key differences, the OPEB plan is mostly closed. And by that I mean full benefits are only available to a closed group of employees and retirees. New members are eligible for a catastrophic disability benefit, but it is far less valuable And so the primary benefits are being paid to a closed group. The other key difference is the member contributions are fixed at 8% of pay for those members eligible for the full benefits. When we do the pension plan, when we make changes, it affects the member contributions. For the OPEB plan, it does not. So we are calculating the city's contributions, and the member contributions are not affected. Now, this chart's showing the funded status for each plan, police on the left, fire on the right. The bars represent the liability. The blue portion is for members who are currently receiving benefits, and the red portion is for members who are still active employees that are entitled to future benefits. The green line is the assets for the plan, showing both the prior year and the current year, and then the percentages show the funded ratio. Just a couple quick comments. Most of the liability you can see is for people already receiving benefits. It's just under 80% of the liability for police, and about 2/3 of the liability for fire is for members currently receiving benefits. That active group is getting smaller and smaller as members retire and start receiving the benefits. And so we're going to expect that to continue. This plan is much more poorly funded than the pension plan. It didn't start funding at all until much more recently. So it's been a buildup of contributions and assets over the last, 15 years or so, whereas the pension plan has been funded for a long, long period of time. But the funded percentage is improving. You can see it going from about 39 to 44% for police, and from 36 to 42 for fire.
Okay, so moving on to the contribution amount, these are, the bars represent the dollar contributions. So the gold part is the city explicit contribution, and the purple is for the member. So as Bill mentioned, the contribution rate for the members are set, but because it's a closed plan, as the active population, as they are terminating or retiring, you're going to see that member contribution decrease and shift a little bit more to the city. The good news is, with some of the investment gains over the last year, the actual contributions that came out for fiscal year ending 2026 are less than what was projected with the prior valuation. So that blue line at the top is what was projected, and then you can see that for both the police and the fire, the total contribution this year came out a little bit less than that. So looking at the unfunded actuarial liability for each plan, so you start off on the left, which so we have police on the left and fire on the right, but within each chart on the left you have the unfunded liability from the prior valuation, and then you have the different movements. In this case, all of them are gains, which lower the unfunded liability, and then you end up with the blue bar on the right of each chart. So the biggest drivers this year were your investment gains. So for both plans, it was a big chunk of it. And then as far as your liability gains go, that came from two components. First being demographic gains, and that was bigger on the fire side than the police side. And what that just refers to as people are actual retirements and terminations and deaths compared to what the current assumptions are. And then the next part is the premium experience, which is how did the premiums this year for 2025 come out compared to what was projected from the prior valuation. So in both cases you had gains across the board, and so for both parts you lowered your unfunded liability. This is looking, this is the same kind of chart, but this is more the changes, and this is combined for police and fire. And what this is, so this is over the last 5 years, what do those changes look like? And you can see everything below 0, those are a gain. Everything that's above 0, those are losses. So the biggest driver of your losses, if you look at the last 5 years, these are, would be your assumption changes. And then as far as, yeah, we'll do that. Look at your assumption changes. They were all losses except for this last year. But if we were to look at investments by itself, you can see your investments oscillate a little bit more, and they're more in line with the movement of the net UAL charge. So it's a big driver of it. So going back just to look at all of them together, your investments, your liabilities, your assumptions, contributions and benefit changes, you can see your big drivers are going to be your liability gains and losses, your investments, and your assumption changes. This is splitting them out of the last 5 years, but if we look at them all combined, you can see those investment gains, losses, as I mentioned, they kind of zero each other, they offset each other. So looking at it here, your biggest driver is your assumption changes where you increase your UAL, but your liability gains and liability gains decrease the UAL. That red bar at the bottom refers to contributions, and that's if you're contributing more than the trade water rate, which is your normal cost plus the interest on the UAL. So you're paying down the UAL, and that's where you're seeing a bit of a gain from that too. So looking at some membership trends, it's split out by each status. So we've got full actives and your catastrophic assets, and then you've got your inactive so far. If we look at, as we mentioned, for full actives, the plan's closed. So if we were to just look at the dark blue line, you can see that that number is decreasing over time. But it's not closed to members for the catastrophic disability. So if we add that in, you can see it's kind of slowly increasing, but a little more level. So you can see that the catastrophic disability eligibility are replacing the people that are eligible for the full benefit as they leave active status.
A quick question on the catastrophic. So, I mean, you talked earlier about catastrophic for tier 2, and they would get healthcare, a lesser benefit. That number is quite large. So is there a catastrophic category for tier 1? And is that basically people that go out on disability prior to age eligibility?
Yeah, so this is what this really counts as, yes, and there are some tier 1s. The tier 1 could elect to go into the catastrophic disability, so it does include some tier 1 people. I think what this is really looking at is who is eligible for it. So it's not necessarily anyone that's actually getting it. It's just anyone who's active that has the VEBA account, they could be eligible for it going forward. So if they become eligible for the catastrophic disability before reaching Medicare.
I was reading it as, like for fire, 288 sworn officers are on catastrophic category. It's just who's qualified.
So these two bars are who is a current active employee that would be eligible for it if circumstances allowed.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. So if we were to add all the others back in, you can see that the total population of the plans are increasing steadily, and that's as the plan matures. As that moves along. But if we got rid of the actives, if we got rid of the catastrophic and the full benefits, full active benefits, you can see how your inactive population is growing, and that's pretty standard with a maturing plan. So what this graph is showing here is your active count distribution. So we've got historically, and we'll skip through it here, but what we've got is historically over the last few years, how is the distribution? So as we push play, it starts with 2024, so kind of close your eyes for 1 second, but as it moves forward, you can see in 2017, you can see those dark blue bars get less and less, and a little more shifting to the right, and then the teal bars kind of come in and replace it. And that's just showing the active counts, the demographics by age, so you can see as you move through time how the breakdown between the active participants has been changing. We got the same thing for your retiree counts here. The breakdown here is based on their election tiers. So basically, if they elect to just cover themselves and a spouse, themselves and a child, or family. So say you can generally see that it is an aging population. You can see it shifts a little more to the right. There are some nuances in there. You know, we did update an assumption this year in that more people are electing the family coverage. So that little purple bar is just getting a little bit more over the years, but nothing too significant or unexpected. So right here we got the projected benefit payments. It's split down. So these are people that are currently in pay status and are expected to retire too. So what are we expecting the benefit payments to be over the next 70 years? And the breakdown is here is if you're going to be receiving, if you're a non-Medicare eligible or Medicare eligible, dental only, and then of course you have that little bit of the catastrophic disability. Now that catastrophic disability is always going to be a very small portion because, you know, to be eligible for it, you know, something bad pretty much has to happen. So we don't expect that number to ever get large. And then you can see that the demographics of the plan, with it being closed and shifting towards that catastrophic disability, you're going to see your expected benefit payments increase over, you know, about the next half of this period. But then after that, it will decrease quite steadily over time.
Yeah, so even though the active group that's eligible for benefits is going away fairly soon, these payments do extend for a long period of time. So this plan will be around for a long period of time, and we'll be funding it. But here we're showing the projection of the actuarial liability. The gray bars are the actuarial liability. The green line is the assets and projected assets. And the numbers at the top are the projected funded status. The lighter bars are the historical information. So we're in the low to mid 40% funded, but projected to increase funding, but not to get to close to 100% until about 2043. So that's still quite a bit of a projection out there. The other thing that you may notice about this projection compared to what you've seen on the pension plan is it peaks. The actuarial liability actually starts coming down near the end of the projection period. And that's because of that closed nature of the full benefit group. So we are going to see the liability kind of reach a peak and start coming down. Whereas on the pension side, it's constantly going up. Now, Jackie talked about the gains this year. We amortized those gains in the contribution over a 25-year period with a 3-year phase in and phase out. So in the pension plan, we have a 5-year asset smoothing because the investment returns are volatile. On the OPEB plan, instead of having asset smoothing to smooth out the impact on contributions, we do it as a part of the amortization here because it's not just the investment returns, it's also the premium changes on the healthcare plan shift the liabilities around and create volatility. And so, so the 3-year phase in and phase out is just designed to help control the volatility of the contributions. This year, because it's a gain, we're showing it go down. It's actually a credit against the city's contributions. And so that works to reduce what otherwise would have been the contribution. But obviously, if we pull in the prior years, we get both gains and losses. Fortunately, since we started this funding method in 2017, we've had a pretty good balance between gains and losses here. But we started by amortizing the unfunded liability in 2017. And so that's the major part of the payment that comes in. The net payment there is the blue line. But that 2017 liability, amortizing that is the major part of the city's contributions.
And I think when that gets fully amortized there in 2043, that's where you see that huge drop because it gets fully amortized.
Yeah. So here we're showing the projection of the city contributions and the member contributions. So the purple bars are the member contributions, and you can see as the active members who are eligible for full benefits retire, those contributions decline and go away. The city's contributions continue to increase over the period. The blue line shows what we had projected last year. So the fact that this is lower is reflecting the gain that we earned in this year. So that's reduced the city's contributions. And then we put in the background this solid area that is the projection of the benefit payments. Right now, the benefit payments are slightly less than the contributions, so we have a positive cash flow, just very slightly positive cash flow. But that is projected to change over the next couple of years, and we will start having a negative net cash flow into the plan. And so that has some implications that we'll just have to manage going forward. The pension plan has negative net cash flow as well, and so that's something that we monitor and exchange information with the investment side so that they're able to monitor the liquidity needs of the plan.
Is it the case that the return assumption is 6%, right?
Yes, the return assumption
Yeah.
here is only 6%
6%.
compared to 6 5/8 on the pension.
And does the 6% cover the gap between the contribution and the benefit payment?
Yes, it does.
It does.
If you get the 6%
Right.
return.
So the liability is not increasing over that period.
Well, the
Unfunded
liability,
Unfunded liability
the unfunded liabilities are not.
is not.
So that's the main part of the presentation. We raised this issue with Federated, and their OPEB plan is much better funded, and so there's some issues we want to talk with them about in terms of the funding policy as they approach higher funding levels with a closed plan. Those issues apply to you as well. They're a little further in the future. But we also think it might make sense to review your funding policy for this plan in the next few years in coordination with what's going on the pension side for this plan. I didn't put a chart in here, and I probably should have, but your projected contributions on the pension plan are expected to remain about level for the next 4 years and then start declining. And that decline is on a pretty significant scale compared to the OPEB plan, where each year the expected decline is about half of the total contribution to the OPEB plan. And so it may make sense when we get to that to revisit the OPEB plan, because for your OPEB plan, we adopted some long amortization periods to manage the costs, and so that's why you're not projected to become fully funded till 2043. And so we could look at both the closed plan issues and as well as considerations for accelerating the funding at that time. So, but as I said, that really doesn't happen for 4 years, assuming things are close to our assumptions. So it's not an immediate issue for this plan, but something to park in the back of your mind that we may want to revisit this in the next couple years ahead of that time period.
Question?
Any
Yeah.
questions?
The bullet point that stands out for me is your third one, which is the liquidity requirements are increasing. I know we have a 5-year immunized cash flows for the pension. I'm not really familiar, I don't remember the top of my head how the liquidity is managed for the OPEB.
I would defer to the to Prabhu or Jay to talk about how they're managing it right now. It's not a significant issue for the police and fire OPEB plan right now, but I know they're monitoring.
Great question. Great question. As you know, when we do our asset allocation reviews, we usually bring up the OPEB trusts after we do the pension policy. If you remember back to the last time we did it, the healthcare trusts have a much more liquid asset allocation. In fact, there are no privates as part of the healthcare trust because it's closed plan, because of the impending higher liquidity requirements. What that means is, you know, the overall factor distributions are similar to the pension, but that's why there's a return differential in addition to the kind of expected return difference.
Yeah, so it is a more liquid portfolio, but what you're saying is your liquidity requirements might increase in the future. Is that the comment from Kairon? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can see the benefit payments are growing and expected to continue growing, whereas the contributions are ultimately going to drop
Yeah.
pretty significantly. And even if they don't drop, you're going from a positive net cash flow to a negative net cash flow. Which is, I think, why they anticipated that, because we've been showing that in the projections.
Yes, that's right. That's why there's no privates again in the OPEB trusts.
Got it, thanks.
And that's normal for a closed plan, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's not anything abnormal going on here. It's just anticipating how that change will take place.
One quick question, and probably getting into some area where I know enough just to be dangerous. For the healthcare plan, and looking at how this is structured and sort of when we're about to hit 100, I believe there are some legal restrictions on if we were overfunded in this, how the assets could or could not be used, and that we want to be thinking about sort of hitting that right on the target rather than overshooting.
Yeah, that's really the second bullet point here, is that there's very limited uses for surplus. And when you have an ongoing plan, you can use that surplus to fund the future benefits. But if you have a closed plan, there really aren't the future benefits to use it to fund. And so that issue is becoming one that we'd like to at least pay attention to on the federated side. This plan is, the funding level's in the 40% range, so we're not concerned in the near term with that. But yes, and I just want to add to that there is a volatility in that funded percentage that's driven not only by the investment returns, but by changes in healthcare costs. And so you could see you could find yourself in a surplus position quicker than you might think. So we just want to anticipate it But starting at 40%, we've got time.
Any other questions? This item is a discussion and action. I'm assuming we're just accepting the valuation.
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion. So moved. And a motion from Dick,
Second Gardenier.
second Gardenier. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And you got the next one too.
Yeah, so I don't need to say much about this one. This is, at the end of the valuation process, we collect both the pension and the OPEB projections and provide this 5-year budget projection of the combined information. So it's all information that was provided in the pension report or the OPEB report, just collected in the detail that the city budget office uses for their projection purposes. We did start, let's see. Well, maybe I don't want to. We did put some information about the volatility in here, but mostly it's just collecting the details of the 5-year projections. And I guess I should say it includes estimates for the city as of the beginning of the year if they prepay their contribution. We don't know if they're making that election, and the board usually makes a decision on the discount to provide in, I believe, the March meeting, maybe the April meeting. These numbers assume the full discount, but that's disclosed as part of the letter.
Any questions on this? Okay, I don't believe this one requires an action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion and action to authorize the CEO to negotiate and execute a lease agreement with Pacific Resources First America LLC on behalf of the Police and Fire Retirement Plans Board Administration. I'll leave it at that.
So I think everybody knows that we operate a little bit in a lag. And so having some discussions with Maytag to how do we present items that are currently open for negotiations, and whether or not we could make those discussions in closed session or not. The answer was the Brown Act doesn't allow us to do that. And so I was hoping that we would be able to get agreement to allow me to negotiate and execute an agreement based on these terms. But what I can tell you is that the landlord has already come back and has made a counteroffer not agreeing to these terms. So I'm not sure we actually need to, we can probably table this, or we should table this, so that by our March meeting, we need to have our terms negotiated and finalized. But I do think that there is value in just walking through some of the terms that we're discussing, and the details of what we're looking to do. So is that okay for me to go through the discussion before we table?
Yes, that's appropriate.
Okay, great. So as we've discussed in the past, we are looking to add a little bit of space within our current building. This space of 2,228 square feet is adjacent to our boardroom in our office. It would be a separate space. This space we estimate will be able to house 16 seats. That includes one office and a small meeting room. We believe this would be the perfect size for our investment team. This will allow us to shift some of our space on the 6th floor such as right now, with our COVID setup and our remote work, and we have grown over the past few years, we actually don't have enough permanent seats for everyone in the office if everybody's in on the same day. And one of the things that we have started to do since I got here, or since January technically, is we have one core day where everybody's in the office on the same day. You know, I think it's so important for corporate culture, cross-training, mentorship, to have everybody in the office on the same day. So as part of this, and we're juggling seats. We have a couple of vacancies, and it's allowed us to get by. But Barbara and I, working with our city counterparts in their real estate department, as well as working with the building, did a space analysis, and we believe that this additional 2,200 square feet will meet the current needs, and provide a small amount of growth for the future, as this contract is contemplated to go for 5 years definitely, with another 5-year option. So ultimately, it could end up being 10 years. As part of this agreement, we've asked the landlord to reduce their base rate for the cost per square foot down from what we're currently paying. We're currently paying, I believe it's about $3.21 per square foot today. Our counter offer, as you can see here, was for $2.65 per square foot. Significant reduction from what we're currently paying, but of course we're also increasing the amount of space that we have. Knowing that we have to do a build out associated with this new space, we requested that the landlord approve a $200,000 tenant improvement, of which at least $30,000 of that could be used for non-typical tenant improvement, which we're classifying as furniture, stuff that would not necessarily be permanent improvements to the building. And then, as I had just said, we're looking to do essentially 5 years. It's a little bit more than 5 years because I've asked to align it to our fiscal year. Because this contract ends in March, I'd like to align it to the June 30th deadlines, and then another 5-year renewal after that. Any board questions? I wish I would be here asking for your approval to allow me to execute, but we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, John, one question. Thanks for the update. Just in this current real estate market for commercial, what's been your experience with the most flexible term? Is it the base rate? Base rent?
It seems that the base rent is where everything comes down to, right? There's a handful of other terms that we have more parking that we need, but they have a parking lot that they're not changing, and they didn't have any concern about saying that, hey, we now have 50 employees, right? Or we want to have parking for 50 employees. It's the base rate that, if we squeeze them on the base rate, they'll want to lower the tenant improvement, right? If you increase the tenant improvement, they'll want to recoup that over time with interest. So, it's the base rate is where I will expect that when we come back in March, it'll be the base rate that'll be the meaningful thing that changes.
Okay, yeah, I guess in this market, there's a lot of pressure on these owners to keep their tenants.
Well, and I think they're, everything is marketing, right? So I think they're more willing to give us abatement on some rent payments, because that's also included as part of, we don't pay until we move in, and they're also going to give us a couple of months where we don't have to pay rent, rather than changing the base rate, because the base rate is what sets the market, right? It also sets up where we are in 5 years when we're renegotiating the rate. So they'd rather give us more money towards some of these things surrounding that and maintain a higher base rate, because everything in the future and their tenants, their additional tenants would be based on what their current market is, right? So.
Great, well, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, John, I had a question. I mean, take it to the right spirit, but is this required to come to the board as long as you're within budget? I'm just wondering why we haven't delegated this to you.
So the authority that I have is only up to $50,000 per board per year, and this will be well beyond that contractual amount.
Or,
I don't believe this is going to be a significant, I don't believe the base rent will be significant movement on the budget one way or the other, because we're lowering we hope to lower this cost per square foot, but we're gonna increase the footage, so it should be very close to balancing out per month. We probably will need some budget in next fiscal year for some of the furnishings, because I believe that'll go beyond the tenant improvement allotment for furnishings. But the overall contract over 1 year, or I think there's another contemplation of my authority, which is if it's 50,000 over 2 years, that still has to come between the board. And we pay like, I don't know, close to 40,000 a month, so.
I remember the 50.
Sure.
Thanks.
Any other
So
questions?
I guess I would be looking for a motion to table.
Yeah. Do we need a motion for that?
We don't need a motion to table, that we can defer action. We've taken the discussion at the chair's direction.
Yes. We will defer that to next month. Hopefully, better success. All right, we're on item F, annual training on fiduciary duties for the Police and Fire Board.
If staff could please help me pull up, they're right on it. Thank you, everyone. So we did this fiduciary training for the Federated Board, and we thought it would be useful to do a fiduciary training for the Police and Fire Board, since we haven't done one in a little bit of time, to provide a refresher for the board. We've discussed fiduciary duties at length at some of our other board meetings, but we thought it'd be best to succinctly discuss these issues at a regularly scheduled board meeting. Next slide, please. So the board is subject to 5 primary fiduciary duties. These are not just fiduciary duties that are just stated in the law. They are stated in the California Constitution and applies to every single retirement board in the state of California. These constitutional fiduciary duties are found in Article 16, Section 17 of the California Constitution, and they are the primary loyalty rule, the exclusive benefit rule, the duty of prudence, duty to diversify, and the duty to follow the plan document. So I have a little gyroscope image here on the side for those who may be familiar what gyroscopes are. They're essentially a nautical navigation tool to tell you how balanced something is. And so essentially you pull a string and all these wheels start working together to keep it in center. And so the reason why I put the gyroscope as the image here is to demonstrate that these 5 fiduciary duties operate together. Sorry, I'm talking a little too close. Operate together to guide the board in its navigation in terms of discharging your fiduciary duties in the plan administration. So a little metaphor there to help you ground all 5 of the fiduciary duties together. Next slide, please. So let's go through each one a little bit in depth here. I'm going to give a pretty high-level summary of each fiduciary duties to give you some of the meat on the bones, but today's presentation will be focused primarily on the duty of loyalty and the duty of prudence, which I like to call the twin duties because they often show up together. And so let's start with the first fiduciary duty. The reason why I call the duty of loyalty the primary duty rule is because it takes precedent over all the other fiduciary duties. Why is that? Well, because our pension fund exists for one purpose alone, which is to pay benefits when due to the members and beneficiary both now and in the future. That's the primary purpose for why our pension fund exists. So because of that primary purpose, the duty of loyalty takes precedence over any other duty. The duty of loyalty requires that each trustee act in the best interests of its members and beneficiaries and not to promote personal or other interests that are not necessarily aligned with the members and beneficiaries. So for example, I'm sure you've seen in the news lots of discussion about ESG and whether or not they're elevating issues that are political or socio-political over investment returns. That's a common issue where there's conversations of whether or not ESG aligns with the duty of loyalty in investment portfolio build-outs. And we can save that for another discussion, but I did want to give you an example of how it might show up. Another example would be to elevate another entity's or stakeholder's interest over the members and beneficiary where it doesn't serve you well. I'm sorry, so the next one here is the exclusive benefit rule. Because we are a trust fund, there's only 2 ways money can be discharged from the fund, and the only 2 avenues are the payment of benefits and reasonable administrative expenses. On the reasonable administrative expenses, that leads us slightly to the duty of prudence. Reasonable administrative expenses requires the board to do their due diligence, so you can only pay out administrative expenses that are commensurate to the value received. So you do need to double check and monitor to make sure all your fees and expenses are aligned with the value you're getting in return for helping you discharge your duties for plan administration. And here's the more important, but a significant one that occurs, which is the duty of prudence. Now, it's a heightened duty of prudence, or heightened duty. It's not a regular, ordinary person standard where you just judge yourself against any ordinary person on the street. The reason for that, for why it's a heightened standard, is because you're dealing with someone else's money. And so because you're dealing with someone else's money, you are held at a higher standard because they are depending on you for their financial livelihood and stability. Part of the duty of prudence is then, in turn, that you're judged against another of the similar knowledge and has the similar duties as you do. Here, it would be the fiduciary duty. So in litigation and how it would come up, the way you act and discharge your duties here would be held as another trustee of another pension fund. So that's the standard you're held against. It's not what any reasonable person or objective person would think, because those objective or reasonable people may not have the same fiduciary duties as you do, and so that's why you're at a heightened standard. The duty of prudence also has a number of various components. For example, we meet once a month, and it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to administer a public pension plan that meets once a month for every single, let me fix this. I feel like I'm speaking. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It's incredibly difficult to administer a public pension plan that meets only once a month as a board. So inherent in the duty of prudence to maintain the administration is that you delegate. You have to make sure your delegation is appropriate, within scope. You have to go back and monitor that delegation because oftentimes our public pension funds are so complex. It does require us to hire experts to help guide us through some of those decision points, and so that we can meet our fiduciary duties to pay those benefits on time. And next slide, please. So the next one here is the duty to diversify, to get the investment returns to minimize risk and maximize returns, unless clearly prudent to do so. Coming into the pension fund, there's only really 2 liquidity streams, or 3 liquidity streams: employer contributions from the city, plan member contributions, and investment returns. Where diversification becomes much more important is where we start seeing like a triangle where we have more people in retirement and pay status than we do active employees paying into the system, and also the employer contributions as well is reliant on the number of active employees that are paying into the system because they pay their contributions as a percentage of payroll. So because of that, the liquidity needs of the fund, as the active members start dwindling and the retiree population grows, it's more and more important to diversify because we need to not only make our liquidity needs now, but we also need it for the future generations 10, 50, 100 years from now as well. So we want to make sure we maintain those liquidity streams to hit our targets. Lastly here is to follow the plan document. Our plan document is not singularly based in one place. It is a constellation of various codes, rules, and regulations. It includes the Constitution, as well as the city charter, as well as the San Jose Municipal Code, the Internal Revenue Code, and also the board's regulations, charters, and policies. One additional point I want to make is that we are a tax-qualified plan under the IRS code. That means the city's contributions as well as the member contributions go into the fund on a tax-free basis. So they're pre-tax dollars going into the fund. So that's why we're considered or called a tax-qualified plan. So part of the rules for the IRS to maintain that tax-qualified status is 2 things. One, we have to make sure that we only pay benefits and administer the plan for the exclusive benefit of the members and beneficiaries. That's first and foremost. And second is that we administer the plan in accordance to our plan document. And so so whenever there's an error, it's really hard because oftentimes to correct that error, we have a mandatory duty to do so. And it's very painful to do errors and corrections. However, the IRS does provide guidance on it. But it emphasizes the point that the board must follow the plan document to implement it. One additional note I want to make on the errors and correction issue is that there have been occasions where the Muni code has come and we had to administer the code and it didn't feel fair. The board has no discretion where the Muni code is directly on point, and we have to administer the Muni code as written because we are not responsible for the plan design. We are only responsible for the plan administration. If there's any issues with the Muni code in terms of how it's written, that should be brought up with the city council because they're the ones with the authority to pass legislation and ordinances to modify the San Jose Municipal Code. We have no ability to do that. We're bound by the Muni code as written. Before I move on to the next few slides, I did want to pause for any questions.
I do have a question. So, in this bullet point, you include charters and policies as part of the plan documents, and then it says we're not responsible for plan design. So, how does something like the policies that we actually most of see on a sort of month-to-month basis, how does that fall into this? Don't we design those?
So. Good question, and thank you for catching that. So wherever the Muni code does not specifically speak to something, or if it delegates authority to the board to make those regulations then become that falls into our discretion to pass policy and regulations to which we are bound. So there is a Muni code provision that allows the board to exercise its regulation and rulemaking authority, and so once they've exercise that authority, it becomes a part of the plan document, which, for example, today we went through with the board election policy. That is currently part of our plan document, and so we have to follow it. And to the extent we want to change it, then we can go through that process with the governance committee and the board and get that ratified, and then that will be a change to our plan document. But where there's no policy currently at place, like, for example, considering a situation from today's example where there is no nomination coming from the November meeting, our policy is silent on that, so the board can exercise its rulemaking authority and discretion to fill that void for the operation of a plan.
Okay, so let me just play this back to you. So the municipal code allows the board to has a clause which says we are allowed to make rules.
That's right.
And under that, we make rules to govern the plan, and that's where the policies, whatever the procurement policy or the investment policies, that's where it sits. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before next slide? Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So, sorry for a little bit of a relic. I meant to update the slide to say police and fire, but as you can see, I did this presentation with Federated first, so I did want to just call that out myself. So you see here, every public pension plan has a number of stakeholders, and I have got a full listing of the various stakeholders that are common to public retirement funds here on this slide. And each of these stakeholders is a stakeholder because they care about the fund's operation because they're invested in it in some way. So for example, the unions are invested in our public pension plan because we administer the benefits that their membership will ultimately get. The city and plan sponsors are stakeholders because obviously they're the backstop and fund the plan and created the plan for the benefit of its employees. Then we've got the general public and taxpayers who have an interest on how much money they're paying in taxes to the city and then in turn paying out to the members and beneficiaries. We have retiree associations and other unions for representing the active members. And we also have consultants and vendors who help us administer the plan. Now, even though we have a litany of stakeholders, you see here I have in a big circle in red letters, our primary stakeholder is our members and beneficiary. They are our sole stakeholder that we look to and in terms of discharging our fiduciary duties. And one thing I would provide you as kind of a a framework to consider is whenever you're tasked with taking action on behalf of the board, always ask yourself, is this in the best interest of our member and beneficiary, and how? Not just is it in the best interest of our members and beneficiaries, but challenge yourself to go the next step further and say how. How is this in furtherance? Because that will help guiding you towards, okay, am I discharging my duty of loyalty? Am I thinking about other things, and how does that go with our ultimate North Star, which is our duty of loyalty to our members and beneficiaries. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to be loyal? And one thing I want to talk to you about is that, you know, everyone on this board sits as interested members, but we don't sit on the board as in a representative capacity. This is not Congress. So however you got to the board, when you sit and approach the dais, you're sitting as a fiduciary trustee. You're not sitting here on behalf of the unions. You're not sitting here on behalf of the Retiree Association. You're sitting here on behalf of the general members of the plan. And so when you think about it, we have only one constituency. I keep going back to it, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself a little, but I think it bears emphasis, is that we only have one constituency in our primary stakeholder, which is the members and beneficiaries. And so you keep that in mind, because it is a constant struggle, I think, for trustees to delineate where and how they discharge their duties, because they feel like they have an obligation to how they got there. Or any special interest group that put you there. But when at the end of the day, we have one constituency and one head, so you wear one hat when you approach the dais, which is your fiduciary duties hat. What else does it mean to be loyal? Well, the board as you can see, is comprised of several trustees, and as you know, the board only acts together collectively as a board, and so because of that, you owe a duty of loyalty to each other to ensure that there's no conflicts of interest in terms of when the board is acting together. So a couple examples of conflicts of interest is serving the interests of others rather than the members and beneficiaries. A pretty obvious one is personal financial interests, accepting gifts that could influence your vote. And if when in doubt, always raise the issue, disclose it with either John or your attorney, and they will advise whether a recusal is necessary. Next slide, please. So this is a court case from the U.S. Supreme Court that kind of illustrates that point that this is not Congress, or the board does not sit in a representative capacity. The quote here that I would like to highlight for the board is the Supreme Court had said, an employee benefit fund trustee is a fiduciary who holds the duty to the trust beneficiaries. I'm sorry, my glasses, I'm looking like I can't see that far. Beneficiaries must overcome any loyalty to the interests of the parties that appointed them. And here's the key point here. There's a distinction between the process by which a person is appointed to the office and the manner in which they perform that office after they become appointed. So the process of how you get there then changes once you become a sitting trustee. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the duty of loyalty from a different angle. Let's talk about it while looking at our constituency of one. What's unique about these public pension funds is that we are an intergenerational pension fund. We have young people, old people, all sorts in the mix. So we're dealing with varying interests in the public pension fund. And because of those varying interests, it's hard to balance at times. Sometimes the interests of active members may not align with retiree members. And so because of that conflict, potential conflict within even balancing the interest within the pension fund, the courts and the law give the board a lot of discretion in terms of understanding and how to meet those competing interests in its plan administration. And so one thing to think about in terms of the impartiality when dealing with the pension fund at large is to consider intergenerational equity and strive to be fair in the long term. Those are a few guiding tip points on what it means to be loyal in the impartiality piece. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the duty of prudence. The duty of prudence is really about good process. Deliberative process matters more than good results. And so once a policy has been passed, the board is, as we discussed a little bit earlier, bound by that policy to continue to follow that policy that's in place, and follow any due process in terms of modifying any policies moving forward. And we already talked about this to a certain degree, that the duty of prudence is a heightened standard, and you're expected to be knowledgeable in all aspects of the plan's administration. So that includes investments, benefit administration, and investments. So one of the things I want to kind of note here as a point to encourage the trustees to go to additional conferences is that you also as a part of the duty of prudence is the duty to educate yourself. You need to be aware of all the various components for the plan administration, and I would highly recommend attending SACRS, which is the county conference that is held biannually, as well as CalPERS, General Assembly. They go further in depth in issues like actuarial issues, investment issues, and common issues for the public pension plans. And so I would highly encourage you to attend some of those conferences for discharging your duty of prudence. And we've already touched on this a little bit, which is the duty to delegate. Again, if you don't have the particular expertise yourself for a particular component of plan administration, the duty of prudence requires you to go out and get it and to delegate within the proper scope. However, once you've delegated that authority, the U.S. Supreme Court has instructed that you can't just set and forget it. You have to go back and diligently monitor to make sure that the delegation is appropriate still. It's being carried out in terms of the delegation that you've provided in meeting those terms, and tweaking it along the way to the extent appropriate. So for example, there's a lot of litigation going around in terms of other, like 403B plans. They're also defined benefit plans, but they're not the same defined benefit plans as we are for public employees. They're usually for hospitals, for example. There was a case amongst them where they gave an investment over and they didn't went back to check it. So eventually those fees on those investments far exceeded the value of the investment returns, and they found a breach of fiduciary duty in that instance because they did not go back and monitor the returns over time. So you do need to periodically monitor, get reports back from those who you delegated. And another point too is when you've delegated your authority, your fiduciary, it does not absolve you or the delegee of your fiduciary duties. That fiduciary duty follows the delegation all the way down the line. So every time you've delegated, the other person to whom you've delegated to has the same fiduciary duties as you do. Though your fiduciary duties then slightly changes. Rather than doing it yourself, your duty becomes to monitor. And again, the breach of fiduciary duties, as long as the board acts in a prudent manner, meaning that it's done due process, it fully vetted its experts, it determined that the scope of delegation was appropriate and periodically checked on it, and created a record, then there's usually no liability for any breach of fiduciary duties if the result turns less than ideal, so long as you follow the process that you've set out. Next slide.
I have a question
Yes.
on delegation. So whom have we delegated authority to from this board?
So you've delegated some authority in your IPS. So for example, those things are, you've delegated a lot of authority in your IPS to the investment staff. That's one area you've delegated. Another area you've delegated, for example, you've hired Chiron to do your actuarial evaluations and also to provide actuarial advice. You're not doing that yourself. You've also delegated essentially any of your consultants that help you with your plan administration. You've delegated those authorities.
So, so do they become fiduciaries then? So is John and
Yes.
Prabhu and staff are all fiduciaries?
Correct.
And the consultants as well?
Yes. So oftentimes when we negotiate contracts, there will be a clause in there that says you agree to act as fiduciary in the actual contract itself.
Sorry, but one follow-up to that. So, since there is a monitoring responsibility, and as you said, delegation doesn't absolve you of your fiduciary responsibility, how do you take it back?
You can revisit your delegation from time to time, and you can always take back any authority that you've previously delegated. But you would have to follow through the process.
It's more a process. It's not a if you discover, for example, in your example about the fees, if somehow, when it's discovered, can you take back the delegation at that point? Does the board vote, or?
Well, it would depend on where the delegation lies. So, for example, if it was in a chart, so let's take John for example. We were just talking about the lease agreement. So we've delegated authority to John to enter and negotiate contract on behalf of the plan for its administration within a certain limit, and I think the limit's $50,000 a year, and so that's the scope of his delegation. Say that we've discovered John has exceeded that delegation, and then so what we would then do is say, well, John, you've exceeded that delegation, but then we would also determine, was it appropriate, was it necessary, and then we would have to re-ratify whatever he exceeded in that circumstance. Now, if the board wants to increase or decrease his delegation beyond the $50,000 or whatever other parameters are set in the CEO charter, then they could do that, but they would go through the governance process. They would go before the governance committee, discuss whether or not that's appropriate, and then once the governance committee has come up with that recommendation of whether or not that scope is appropriate to keep the same change, up or down, then that would come to the full board for ratification.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I'm almost there. So here's the leading case on the duty of prudence. It's the O'Neill versus Stanislaus County case. And let me just tell you really quickly what the factual background of this case is. Following the 2008 financial crisis, the Stanislaus County Employees Retirement System suffered tremendous investment losses, which were then compounded by discovering some actuarial mishaps in terms of undervaluation, and so because of that, they were facing a huge UAL, and the city, which they told the city, and the city was also facing some budgetary cuts, and the city told the board, well, we may have to cut jobs because we can't pay this UAL. So what do we do? And so at the same time, though, because they had such high excess earnings in previous years, they had paid out some retiree benefits for healthcare premiums that are not vested under the statute, but were additional benefits that were paid out. So the board had to take action to level set to make sure that they had the liquidity they needed to continue to fund the plan, and also to maintain the competing interests of the two sides of its membership. The retirees wanted the continuation of the retiree benefit subsidy to be paid to them for their healthcare premiums. And the active members had the interest in paying in their active service, because the more years of service you have, the more of a retirement you can have as well. And the city also was faced with a financial constraint. In that case, the board did two things. One, it moved the excess benefit payments and stopped the healthcare retiree subsidies and put the money back into the pension plan to bring up some of the value. So the retirees sued the pension plan because they wanted the continuation of their benefit. But the board had balanced their duties to the active members as well, and considered the liquidity issues for the plan, and moved the excess benefit into the primary fund, which would then lessen some of the financial impact to the employer. Because one of the considerations in that case was, well, because we need liquidity coming in, maintaining an active payroll for the active members, and also having the city continue to be able to make contributions to allow us to have continued liquidity is useful. So that's one example of how there's competing interests from multiple ends, and where the board had to weigh competing interests towards maintaining the long-term financial stability of the fund and considering the liquidity funding streams as part of that calculation. I will send a copy of that case to you all after the meeting, and I do recommend you take a look and read through it. It's a complicated case, it's very lengthy, but when reading it, you'll see that the board exercised its prudence because it held several open meetings, it heard from all the stakeholders, it invited several experts from the Actuaries Council and consultants to come and look at the issue and really weigh the various options. They had a series of options and a series of actions they took to reach the position that they did. And today they're doing much better financially. But this is a landmark case in California on the duty of prudence, so I highly recommend taking a look at that case. Next slide, please.
Can I just
Yes.
So we use consultants, we use legal counsel like you. Now, supposing a consultant suggests a certain asset allocation, which is risky, let's say, and we followed that, and therefore the plan had, losses. Is that still our responsibility because they provide advice, but we're not bound to follow what they tell us, right?
Well, it's hard to tell you in a vacuum whether or not what to do in that circumstance and how many consultants have, and I'm sorry to provide you an unsatisfying answer as a lawyer, it depends.
Well, I'll give, and
But
just to throw
let me-
something out there, the
sure.
consultant comes back and says, Donald Trump is the president, he's bullish on Bitcoin, put 50% of your assets in Bitcoin. I'm just making a hypothetical scenario, right? Which to me is not prudent, right? And so I would say, despite what the consultant says, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to vote against it.
Well,
I mean,
so
that to me is the prudent way of doing it. I mean,
So the question then becomes, did you hire the right consultant? Because as a part of your duty to delegate and
Yeah.
hire those expertise, it's part of the hiring process. So
Mhm.
before you even get there, you have to determine, did I have the right qualifications
Right.
in this circumstance? So that's step one. And then step two, in terms of the delegation, they can come back to you. In this circumstance, you have not delegated authority to them,
yeah.
because you still retain the ultimate
Right.
authority to make the investments. Here, they're acting in an advisory role, and so it's a little different.
Right.
then
So it's
what
still
you
our
get.
responsibility.
It's still your responsibility. Because here's the thing, when you're delegating, you're letting go of a decision-making point. That's what delegation means. So because you've delegated some authority on something, you're delegating a decision-making point.
Right. So in that case, for example, we delegate manager selection to the investment staff, and so we're not interfering with that. That's for them to do it, right? Unless we see a reason to pull it back. So we're not interfering with that. But the asset allocation is still our decision.
That's right. So for example, we have not delegated, as far as I understand it, to allow Makita to commit us to an asset allocation and then go out with it without bringing it back to the board for ratification. So that's the scope of the delegation.
Actually, to follow up on that. So to your point on manager, using that as an example, manager selection to the team, how does the monitoring duty come? We've delegated to them, they're investing in managers, but if we see that a particular manager is underperforming, what is our monitoring duty?
So the monitoring duty is regular periodic monitoring of receiving reports on performance evaluation. So if you've received the performance evaluation and it's within the scope of your delegated authority and it's performing the same way within the projected returns that you're expecting, and it's operating within its delegated authority, you've met your delegated authority, because in terms of monitoring, because there's nothing that raises a red flag, for example, that's beyond the scope of what you've delegated. Now, let me give you another example. Say you've delegated something and they've changed their investment style, and that's not what you hired them to do in the first place. Say that you hired them to be a passive manager, but now this workshop is now becoming a more active manager, and their investment style is just not what you hired them to do. So that would be a red flag where you would revisit a delegation, because they're not doing what they're doing within the scope of delegation to what you've delegated them to do.
So you're saying if the fund is underperforming, but we have already delegated authority and the team has said, no, we're going to stick by this fund, our monitoring responsibility doesn't require us to sort of scale back that authority. But we can't direct them to, reduce exposure, for example. Is that what you're saying?
Once you've delegated authority, that individual or that entity is the one who has the authority to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's a circumstance where you feel like they are not operating within their delegated authority, then yes, you can revisit that delegation, the gifting. Let's use an easier term, gifting of authority to act. You can always rescind that back and readjust it to where the risk you feel is more appropriate.
Got it.
So just
But it's more of a governance issue.
just to clarify for my own head on this, especially with managers, where I think we're delegating to investment staff who's then selecting and monitoring the managers. If I understand it correctly, our fiduciary duty is really oversight of the investment team and ensuring that say the manager is underperforming, or if they've changed styles, that the investment team is following the established policies and procedures for how they look at this manager and evaluate whether they should stay in or be taken out of the portfolio.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I know I'm hogging the mic a little bit. It's my last one, I promise.
Ask as many as you would like.
Yeah, I mean, this is an important topic, clearly. So the one thing that struck me as a follow-up to Ishwar's question is, and also the fact that we are not just governed by the constitutional fiduciary duty responsibility, we're also governed by Brown Act. Clearly, as you know, a 9-member board, how do you balance if some members dissent based on their interpretation of their fiduciary duty? How do you sort of develop consensus? Is that a requirement? Just some guidance around that will be helpful.
So can I ask a follow-up question to make sure I understand what
Sure.
the question is? So is it that you're wondering whether the delegated scope is appropriate, or are you wondering if the investment manager or investment personnel is exceeding their authority, or what's the consideration or concern that you're
This
asking
question
about?
was unrelated to the example. It was more generally, if we are all individually making a decision on what our fiduciary duty is, in a perfect world, we should always say yes. Like, we should all agree. But that's not, I mean, we all have certain different interpretations, and we'd sometimes dissent based on what our interpretation of our fiduciary duty is. So how does that interact with Brown Act, where we can't sit down always and discuss outside of the board to understand that?
So you're right, the board does need to conduct all its business in open public meetings, and the reason for that is to make sure that the public has an opportunity to see the deliberative process and make sure there's no backdoor deals. So that, to answer your first part of the question, so yes, it has to occur in an open public meeting. And to answer your second part of the question of what to do when you personally disagree with a recommendation that's being put forth, what my recommendation for your fiduciary duties would be to understand who's giving you the recommendation. Is it an expert? And if the expert is providing that recommendation, to ask what their background is for that recommendation, to provide their justification rationale for it so that you can understand where they're coming from. And then from there, if you fully don't agree with the recommendation and the board can't come to a consensus on something, it's fully within the board's authority to get a second opinion. We've done that before on a couple of tax issues, as you recall, that we had the Sodro issue where we had a tax issue where the board wasn't fully on board with the expert opinion the first time we got it, and then we revisited it with another tax consultant to vet whether that opinion was on all fours or could not move the needle, and in that instance, we had 2 opinions. And the board then considered both opinions and made its decision.
So what I'm hearing from you is, let's go back to Ishwar's example, which is either the asset allocation recommendation, which is obviously somebody from the Makita or one of the consultants makes. If if one of us on the board says that no, I think there's too much private market allocation, for example, I'm just making it up, or Dogecoin, or whatever you want to say, and whereas let's say 7 of the 9 members think it's fine. What do the other 2 members do? Is it against our duty to?
No, it's not against your fiduciary duties. So one thing for your fiduciary duties does not require the board to agree on everything. That's the reason why we have to open and public discussion and have a fulsome deliberation on the record. When the board does act, though, it does require the board to act together. The fact that a few members have dissented on a particular issue and does not necessarily make the decision imprudent. It just shows that the board has fully deliberated the issues, weighed the pros and cons, and reasonable minds can disagree on a lot of things. So you should never feel that you have to be lockstep with all the other board members, and if you don't, you're breaching your fiduciary duty. You're all independent thinkers here. Think about a jury, for example. Every jury member who shows up is an independent thinker, but the ultimate result on a verdict is the same.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
So before I close, I did want to just draw a parallel to just kind of situate our plan in more layman terms, which is that think about trusts and estates. I think everyone's kind of familiar with a will and a trust, a living trust, for example. Our plan is governed by the same trust principles. So the plan sponsor is the settlor who creates, or trustor who creates the plan. The members and beneficiaries, the active and retired members and their survivors and beneficiaries, they're the beneficiaries of the plan. Our plan document, which usually is a trust instrument, a will or an estate document, is a collaboration of various laws of the city charter, the Constitution, the San Jose Municipal Code primarily, and the IRS tax code. That's our plan document. And so we sit as trustees in the same way that a trustee would sit in a wills or a trust and estate aspect. They're there to administer the plan and do so for the benefit of the members and beneficiaries. So with that, I conclude my fiduciary training for today. But if there's other areas of fiduciary training that you would like for further discussion, please let me know. I'm happy to provide follow-up training at a later board meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item G, discussion and action on adoption of updated city policy manual 4.2.2 military leave with revised date of January 24th, 2025.
I have a quick summary for each of these next policies. As I had mentioned earlier, these are city policies that were adopted by City Council with minor updates. We don't believe they have material impact on OS operations, so that's why they're coming directly to the boards. I think going forward, I'll work with the chair and in a discussion of having these on the consent agenda so we don't have to have individual votes when we don't believe there's any concern. But for today, this policy, the updated language in section 2 and 3 are to clarify the health coverage and deferred compensation plan options. So again, minor change.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to, got a motion from Dick? Second from Gardner.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I read the wrong summary, just to clear the record. This 422, this is for military leaves. This is updates made throughout the policy clarifying that employees will continue to accrue benefits during the transition period between military leave and return to service. My apologies.
Okay. Do we have to do these all individually?
Yes, as agenda issue, you do.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Discussion and action on the updated city policy 324.
324 was the one that I just read. It's the updated language in section 2 and 3 to clarify group health coverage and deferred compensation plan options.
Okay, I have a motion from Dick,
Second Gardner.
second from Gardner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Discuss an action on adoption of updated city policy 413 on bilingual pay.
Section 5 and 6 were updated to the policy to provide clarification for in-person language assistance and emergency response language access guidelines to mirror the language in the city's language equity policy and guidelines.
And a motion from Dick,
Second Gardner.
second Gardner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Just a question on that. Does bilingual pay included in retirement? Is that a separate issue? Is it included in the final?
For us, you mean, for staff? We do have a few staff that get an upgrade in pay because they can handle alternate
Well, I
languages.
understand it. Is it included in retirement? The extra
Oh,
pay
I
they
see.
get?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I can look into that and see if it's pensionable, a pensionable pay
I
code.
can tell you for police, it's not.
And fire, it's not.
Yeah.
Right, that's
It's
what I'm
based
asking.
on base pay.
So is it included in federal?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with their contracts.
We'll get that answer to
Thank
you.
you.
I think it says in here that it's bilingual pay will not be considered as part of employee salary for retirement
No.
calculation purposes.
Yeah, typically it's not because it's an incentive pay. Okay, discussion and action on adoption of updated city policy 426, sick leave with, didn't we just do that one?
No,
No.
it's
Nope,
it's
that's
slightly different.
Sorry. Sick leave with revised date of January 22nd.
Updated sections A and C to align with the new laws that provide leave entitlements for an employee who was the victim of a crime or to assist a family member who was the victim of a crime. Additionally, a definition section was added.
Motion to approve.
A motion from Dick,
Second Gardner.
second from Gardner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, moving on to retirements. Service retirement of Anthony R. Alfonso, Police Sergeant, Police Department, effective March 1st, 2025, with 28.49 years of service. Retirement of Steve Biscup, Police Officer, Police Department, effective January 22, 2025, with 27.75 years of service. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion approved.
Got a motion from Dick.
Second, Woolsey.
I got a second from Woosley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Defer vested, 5.2. Chase R. Hag, Police Officer, Police Department, effective February 16th, 2025, 27 years of service. Reciprocity. I will move for the approval.
Second.
A second from Dick. All those in favor?
Aye.
To say anything, Dave?
Sorry?
You want to say anything?
I'll just thank them all for their service.
Excellent. Okay, number 6, death and survivorship notifications. Notification of the death of Robert Allen, Deputy Chief of Police, retired April 1st, 1978, died December 29th, 2024. No survivorship benefits. Notification of the death of Robert L. Dorman, Fire Chief, retired March 6, 1999, died November 30th, 2024. Survivor benefit to Penny Lou Dorman, spouse. Notification of the death of Erwin Kirby, Police Officer, retired March 12, 1995, died January 1st, 2025. Survivorship benefits to Diane Kirby. Notification of the death of Keith Moylan, Police Officer, retired February 6, 1997, died November 2nd, 2024. Survivorship benefits to OK How Moylan, spouse. We'll have a moment of silence. Okay, anybody like to say anything?
I'll yield to the police officer and I will close.
Thank you. Those are some really long retirements, and I'm glad that they got a lot out of their later years in life.
Yeah, I would agree. The fact that I don't even recognize some of these names tells me they got a good lengthy retirement.
Mr. Chair, I did have the privilege of knowing some of the police officers, and it's sad to hear, especially Chief Dorman. We worked together as firefighters, and he was one of the best battalion chiefs I had. And when it came to the big emergencies, he was the guy, and so best to his family.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to committee minute reports. Investment Committee.
We had a meeting in January. Dinesh presented on private markets. We also discussed transaction costs, FX, and trading costs.
I have a question for, sorry, I'm not on the committee anymore, so I have to ask you here, but I noticed that the May minutes have been filed, so I know we still haven't brought it, I mean, I know there's the ad hoc committee, but how does the team operate now? On the assumption that this is, something is coming, or the limits are not really constraining them, so,
You mean in terms of the IPS issue?
yeah.
Let me talk to Prabhu, see what's going on. I know Eileen and Makita are working on it, so I'm not actually sure what the status is. I'm surprised it's taking so long though.
Yeah, just curious whether
Yeah.
they are assuming that it's, until the board approves, obviously, it's not a planned document.
Yes,
Just,
yeah. I'll follow up.
yeah, thanks.
Update the board.
Okay, thank you. We'll receive and file the minutes. Audit risk.
We haven't had a meeting since October. Our next meeting is this month in audit.
Thank you. Governance. We have not had a meeting.
And we have one, Mr. Chair, you nominate me to be chair.
Yes.
That'll be in March, so
Yep.
we'll address whatever issues people want, we'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Disability Committee.
Yeah, everything is there. David Woodley is an excellent new addition to our committee. Everybody does well. We'll be here this Monday, the 10th at 10 o'clock at headquarters. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll receive and file the minutes. And then JPC.
Our next meeting is in April, so.
Thank you. Legal Services Joint Ad Hoc Committee. I'll let you
Sure.
summarize that.
We've had a number of meetings in preparation for receiving proposals for legal services, RFP that was released. Right now, the committee has decided that it will score, the trustee components of the committee will score the general counsel and fiduciary along with myself. And then on the general counsel, we also have some staff as well. For all the other legal services, staff is performing the scoring, and the plan is for the staff to prepare a recommendation memo that will go to the ad hoc committee. And at that time, the ad hoc committee will decide whether or not they want to interview the finalists, or if there is one standout and the staff feels like that is a direct recommendation. The committee could also decide to recommend to the board to have me negotiate the contracts directly if they so chose, or to interview, or to bring to the full board to the interview. So we still have a lot of options ahead of us. It's, I can, not, because we've got 3 ongoing procurements, and we have a very strong, what I would call senior staff, but they're all engaged in this, in all 3 of these RFPs, and so it's all hands on deck right now, trying to get through the legal services, and then we're going to chip away at the actuarial, and Barbara and I, well, we're not at the other ones yet, so I'll hold my comments.
Thank you. And then I think the last one is Actuarial Services Joint Ad Hoc.
Nothing to report.
Thank you.
So I can give a quick update. We've received 5 proposals. We have, internally, we're going to have them reviewed by staff. The staff will then make recommendations for interview to the ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee will, I think we had said that there would be a decision whether or not we will be interviewing, and it was dependent on how many proposals we received. The last time we only received 2, and we really need to hire 2 actuarial services, one to be our actuary, one to be our actuarial auditor. This time we received 5 proposals, which is very good. And so we'll have to determine how the ad hoc committee wants to work through that, whether they want to be the interview for the finalists, or if they want to bring it back to the board, the full boards, to be the interview for the finalists.
Great. Thank you. Do you have any proposed agenda items? Okay, we are adjourned.